Charlie.
And I'm Ashley Watkins, and we're talking about privacy versus security, and we are now open for questions.
So why don't you give us kind of a definition of what you mean by that? It's like, are we talking specifically internet privacy and security, or where are we going?
Okay, so it's, specifically we kind of focused on privacy laws in the U.S. and kind of like branched out in certain other countries, specifically with internet regulation and kind of the laws that protect our rights for privacy, but also secure the security of the United States, and how we find the balance between those two things.
So, quick question: privacy good?
Privacy, yes.
Security good?
Yes.
Where's the conflict?
You have to find them. Sorry, you wonder?
Yeah, both are good, but they're kind of inversely connected. So
Okay.
if you raise up security, you're going to get less privacy. If you raise up privacy, you get less security. So try to get the perfect balance in between both of them, so that you still have your rights, but
Okay.
still have privacy.
Now, when I was your age, which was many, many years ago, Al Gore hadn't created the internet yet. So this wasn't a big deal, but it seems to be a very large talking point these days. What has happened recently that's brought this to the forefront? Give me a little recent histrionics on why this security issue and this privacy issue becomes such an inverse.
Well, a lot of like data mining.
Okay?
Like websites like Google, they're like kind of recording some of your information that you use, and there's some that's your private information.
Okay?
And there's a controversy of whether they should be allowed to do that or not do it, and how it affects you, and like why you should be concerned about them.
Okay. Anything been in the news recently, last couple of years, that make this important?
I'm
Nate?
assuming you're hinting at the Facebook scandal that's kind of been going on a little bit recently.
Am I? Okay.
If I know you well enough, I'm assuming
Okay.
so.
Okay,
No,
good. That's a
but-
big assumption.
Yeah, that is fair.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, in the past decade or so, we've seen this explosion in social media and all of this, which has created more information than has been created. Like the past 10 years is more information that's been created than all of history
Okay.
before that, all data before that. And just trying to understand that and how to work with that is where this whole issue arises. But I'm assuming you're talking about the Facebook scandal, at least in some extent.
Sure.
Are you wanting a background on that, exactly what's happened or what?
Well, let me draw back to something you just said. You said more data has been created recently than all the time up till then.
Yeah.
Who is creating this data? Just I talked a little bit about data skimming, I think is what you were going at with Google thing. Who's creating the data? Who has the data? Who's skimming the data? What's going on here?
Well, everyone is creating the data.
Okay.
That's the key thing with social media, and beyond that, even just general businesses. I mean, any computer that operates is creating data in some way, shape, or form.
Okay.
Through information that you input or receive, and then being stored on the servers that the internet operates, which are, don't know if you actually want to store that, but yeah, the whole idea of that.
So if I'm inputting data, are you creating the data, or am I giving it to you voluntarily?
If you're creating the data,
No, if I'm inputting the
if you're
data.
inputting the data into my server,
Yes.
then you're giving it to me voluntarily, but
Okay.
with the terms and services that you accept in order for legal justifications and all of that, and then it's supposed to be regulated by the government, which is part of what we're trying to argue, is that it does need some regulation in order that it's not a monopoly. I mean, it's similar to what kind of happened in the turn of the century, where you had these huge companies that were made and then exploded in their businesses and essentially had monopolies on everything they're doing, like, I'm trying to remember exactly what is the Vanderbilt, that's what it was, the railroads. They
Right.
had a monopoly on it, and what happens if you don't regulate the data is that you have these companies like Google that end up with a monopoly on everything that's going on, and no one is capable of entering the field, and you have no option than to give them your data. Because as we've seen, creating data has become a natural and an essential facet of our daily lives.
Okay. I think you just said that Google is the railroad, but I'm not sure. I think it
To
was
some extent.
To some
I'm using
extent,
it as
okay.
a parallel in monopolies and
Okay.
why the government needs to involve themselves for the sake of privacy, for the citizen.
So Nate, I have you on record as saying the government needs to come in and regulate data collection in some way on the internet. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, Josiah, you feel the same way? Okay, Ashley, you feel the same way?
I do agree that the government does need to regulate it at some point to protect our rights, but also if you protect it too much, it's going to be harder for you, for companies to trade and advertise and kind of run their own business if they're constantly having to kind of, act under the regulations of the government.
So
That's,
what,
oh, sorry.
No.
No, I was just gonna say that's where part of the balance comes in. That's it.
so what are the security pros to this? What's good for us as citizens, average Joes? What's good for us in terms of security if the government does get involved in our usage, I guess, or?
Would you like to take that?
Yes, okay. So, in relation to why security is needed, there's always most people find their information on the internet. So if you are looking for something that could be potentially harmful to other people, say, how to make a weapon or that type of thing, the government's going to be able to tell, like, this is what this person's searching. We might want to take a further look into that, like, why are they looking at that? So that's where the security part kind of comes in.
What about from a terroristic activity standpoint? At what point can the government get in and protect its citizens?
All right, so after 9/11, there was a lot of acts that were made. One of them was the Homeland Security Act and the Patriot Act, which enabled for the use of kind of complete surveillance of people's phones, all media, internet, emails, and that was used by the NSA for a couple years, I think, before they kind of abused it and used it to kind of report too much data from people's cell phones, and that was caught. That's kind of a point where security kind of goes too far.
What's your feedback on that? Is that too far to protect our country?
I think at a certain point where if it starts to make people fearful and feel almost insecure that they're being watched all the time, I think that's when security goes too far.
Are they being watched all the time?
Not yet.
Are you sure? Okay. We've talked about two different sides of this conversation. Actually, I think you spoke a lot to the government side of this. Nate, you certainly spoke to the private entity or corporate side of this. So you've talked about Google and Facebook. Josiah talked a little bit about data skimming. Actually, you were talking about the government collecting and monitoring things. And there's certainly both pieces of that equation at play here. And I would like to know kind of what your feelings are on that. Government regulation, you said, is good to help eliminate monopolies. But we've also talked about the government pulling our phone records. We've talked about the government having access to internet search results, to other internet and data traffic, and collecting that information. We've got private entities over here, or not private entities, corporate entities, collecting information in the way of Google and Facebook. Where is the balance of you're a private citizen, you have data, the government has now the right to skim it, to look at it, to collect it? Where does that end? And then what is the onus on a corporation and the amount of data that they collect and how they can use it? So government, corporations, go.
Okay, so there is one kind of commission. It's called the Federal Trade Commission Act, which allows citizens to kind of go to court and say, like, this has been, whatever this company has done or this certain people group has done has impeded my rights as a citizen, and you can go and kind of give your case, and they can either, require the company to give back the information or charge the company a certain price to kind of compensate for the damage that they've done to the individual.
So is that just for companies or is that for government? Can I go say the government's taking too much of my data, the government's mistreating my data somehow, and can I sue the government for that then, through that same court?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not totally sure on that because I haven't specifically researched that type. But I would say any citizen has the right to sue the government. I mean, that has happened before. So.
Who from the government is skimming my data right now?
Well, essentially, nearly every intelligence agency that I could know
I'm
of.
thinking one in particular.
Thinking NSA, I'm
The
assuming?
NSA is the one I'm
Yeah.
thinking of. Why am I thinking of the NSA, Nate?
I'm assuming you're talking about the scandal where they were indeed recording essentially everyone's phone records for, not that one?
They weren't. They are.
Oh, sorry,
Current,
because
yes.
they never really.
They haven't stopped that,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
You wanting me to discuss that? then?
Tell me what do you know about what the NSA is doing to phone, internet traffic, any digital data?
Well, a lot of that isn't entirely unknown, although a lot of it was released from Edward Snowden. And
There's the word I'm looking
there's
for.
the
There you go. Go with
lovely
that.
guy. So you're wanting me to discuss Edward Snowden? then?
Well, talk to me about the NSA. Talk to me about how we found out about that. Talk to me your feelings about Edward Snowden.
Well, there's
And
a
share with
lot
your
of
friends.
stuff that we don't entirely know about Edward Snowden. I was
Okay.
actually at a, what is it? SI camp, a strategic intelligence camp, 2 summers ago, and a guy who was a former CIA agent had said that he'd heard something about Edward Snowden potentially having been a German sleeper cell, which was very surprising to me. So that
Interesting.
his friends in the intelligence community were saying that, but that there's a fair chance that there's a lot of debate as to whether or not he was a sleeper cell or whether or not he just saw that what the NSA was doing and thought that it was wrong. The idea that it was an infringement of people's freedom and their privacy, which is the key thing we're trying to
So
get.
what did he say that the government was doing?
Well, he said in exactly the fact that they were recording phone calls without anyone's knowing, or to some extent, I think authorization from Congress. I'm not entirely sure on that one though, but I mean I think that's the highlight that the majority of people were terrified. I mean, there was stuff that was released about the CIA, stuff that they'd done, the files that he'd gotten into. But beyond that, yeah.
Whose data were they tracking? You said phone calls, certainly internet
Oh,
traffic
sorry,
falls into that, email falls into that.
Just general citizens of the U.S.
So not criminals, but
Not necessarily criminals, but everyday citizens as well. The idea was that if you get everyone, then you get the criminals too.
How does the United States differ from other countries in terms of regulation?
Well, the U.S. in comparison to countries such as China and Russia, which are two of the other leading sides in cybersecurity issues, or at least are similar to the U.S. in the amount in which they do. I'm not entirely sure on Britain or other European nations, but China, I know, within the past 2 months, I believe, enacted a law. This is a little odd anecdote, but they enacted a law that in public restrooms you would have to have a face scan in order to dispense toilet paper. You would get 9 plies, and then 30 minutes later you could get 9 more plies. They offered it up as a way of conserving resources, I believe, but in my personal opinion, I believe they were attempting to enter every single one of their citizens into their database so they could then more easily track them. There's been, actually, I think they've publicly admitted that they have cameras in the city that analyze gait walk and have facial recognition. They say, I think they leave it under the guise that it is to enforce jaywalking, because if you jaywalk, you have a very high likelihood of getting a ticket arriving at your door within the next week, no matter where you are in any major cities.
So kind of piggybacking off that, I have several friends who live in China. One just left this morning actually to go back home. And I have to use I have to use WeChat, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with that, in order to communicate with her, because Facebook is basically locked down, especially because she holds certain beliefs that might not match her superiors. What do you guys think of that extreme of censorship, or I guess privacy? Hearing from all of you would be sweet.
Okay. Well, I think the issue with China definitely is the government is such a large part of their daily life and because the government is so, in a way, controlling of what they do and so knowledgeable of what they do, it's hard for them sort of to advance. So I think...
Like the everyday citizen to advance?
Well, to have their own opinion, pretty much, because if you have your own opinion, what's going to stop the government from coming for you? So I think if the government's constantly controlling what people say, what they do, no one's going to speak up and try to, think, well, maybe this would be a better idea to make our nation better. So.
Anyone else other than China?
Oh.
Your research
Russia.
I think they're fairly similar to China, although they're not as open about it. Majority of the stuff that they do is very private, we'll say. Although I do know that they have a list of, they recently added, I think, 6 other countries to it. I don't remember the exact countries, but a list of countries that they don't allow information that they stress as being of a national secret, although they classify that of nearly everything as a national secret. Being able to be transferred through the internet outside of the country, except for the specific list which the U.S. is not on. But anything that goes out of the country or is sent in the country, they control. I remember reading a book about them during the Cold War, or towards the latter end of the Cold War. They had specific buildings that every single line or network cable in Russia would be sent to, and it went directly through it. Everything that went in or out or was even transferred from a different computer. And that's even not only the government systems, but every single private system that there was. Yeah, so it is highly regulated to a similar state as it is in China.
So Josiah, what are your thoughts other than the potential, like citizens not being able to advance, or some other good, bad things about this heavy of regulation?
I think if you're talking about how like they shut down Facebook.
Or just.
Well, I think that I don't know, like Facebook started on Facebook, and I think that what they choose for their people, like the government chooses for their people, I think that it's just completely separate from ours. And I don't know if that kind of affects the people in the U.S. trying to communicate with people over there. And I think that it's fine with them that they can choose what they do and do not want the people to be exposed to and influenced.
Would you argue that Russia or China is safer than we are? Should we aspire to this level of regulations that they have?
I definitely think in regards to whether China or Russia is safer than the U.S. I'd say government-wise, it's not, because there's not someone constantly checking up on the government saying, should you really be doing this? Is this an invasion of my privacy and who I am as a human being? But I think on the other side, it also makes the government more powerful, and the country is unable to be more divisive, because in the U.S. Specifically, everyone has their own opinion. And when everyone has their own opinion, it's easier for people to get offended by what someone else says or believes. So when you're not allowed to have an opinion, you're not allowed to really, dissent from whatever the government is saying.
We talked a little bit about corporations. Facebook and Google are probably the two prime ones that come to mind, being that they're, I think, 90% of all online advertisement comes either through Google or through Facebook. You talked about government regulation on data sharing, data skimming, those sorts of things. How, other than government regulation, can we ensure that companies like Google and Facebook play by the rules, do things that we would prefer them do, and not use our data in a malicious way?
Well, from Wesley's perspective and Mark's perspective, is that it's like it's a free source that we can use,
Okay.
and that we don't pay for. So they have to make some money somehow, and to sustain themselves.
Right.
And so they do that by selling our data to government if it's needed, or political means.
So you make a good point, Josiah. They do need to make money to be a viable company, right? Their whole point is to make money for their shareholders and to keep their company going. So if we don't use government regulation, how else can we ensure that large corporations like Facebook and Google play by the rules?
I would say that it's society's job to attempt to do that. If a society revolts from say Facebook for this example, for selling their data, Facebook is going to stop. I mean, they will still make money by not selling their data and simply selling ads. But if you remove the society entirely, then they make no money at all. Which actually has been shown somewhat with the, I believe there was a forget what percentage drop there was, but there was about I think 10%